This is our drone crew. They're going to ingest the package into our systems, and then they'll move the drone into position onto the pad here, and off they go.
CNBC got an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at Amazon's new drone delivery service, now live in West Phoenix. This drone program is the latest cutting-edge piece of tech to go into service in Phoenix, a city that has seen a massive tech transformation in recent years.
I don't know if it's just me, but it almost looks like that drone is just pooping out a package. But maybe I was the only one, but you're probably not going to be able to unsee that now.
Jenga.
I think this technology is just going to change the way we order.
We're a place that enables these companies to have success, to move quickly, and test to validate their technology platforms.
The city has been a long-time hub for aerospace and defense.
The Apache helicopters made here. Base technology is also heavily concentrated here. A lot of med tech here.
A couple of years ago, we located Blue Origin's HQ2.
Now the region is becoming an epicenter for autonomous vehicles and semiconductor manufacturing.
Taiwan Semiconductor make a major investment, $65 billion investment here in North Phoenix.
The U.S. business is 65 to 75% of all TSMC's revenue, so the U.S. is very important to TSMC.
While cities like Austin have garnered attention for drawing tech companies away from Silicon Valley, Arizona and Phoenix have been just as competitive. Between 2018 and 2023, the city's tech talent workforce grew by 17.2%.
5 million people, top 5 city. And across all of that, we're a place that's very attractive when you want to test new, novel technologies.
Over the last decade, there were 67 technologies.
So that is pretty interesting. I would agree. I think there's been more hype over Austin, Texas, as being a new tech hub in recent years. I think people talk about Phoenix every so often. Similarly, like they talk about Boulder, for instance, or maybe sometimes the Carolinas as an example. Other up-and-coming areas for tech. But I think one of the key things that made Austin so interesting was I think they already had like a pretty vibrant culture and city that existed. And also Phoenix, for instance, I believe gets really, really hot. Like I'm pretty sure they have days over like 120 pretty consistently. And so there's a huge heat wave going on over there. So it would definitely be noticeably less pleasant would be my expectation than it would be for Texas. And also I think one of the draws for Texas, as an example, is I think also very prominent individuals in the media were moving to Texas as well because of the tax incentives. So I think Elon Musk, for instance, moved there. I think some of the other celebrities or billionaires, etc., had considered moving or moved there at least at some point because there is no income tax in Texas. There is income tax in Phoenix. And so there's less of an incentive and there's less of an interesting dynamic there where I think those things compounded where a lot of tech companies were going there for less taxes compared to California. People were actually moving there for less taxes than California as well. And it's a unique advantage that Texas has. I believe there's only about 9 states out of 50 in America that don't have an income tax. So that does make them fairly unique. And for that to be an up-and-coming area, I think that just kept adding news segments time after time of company after famous individual after company after famous individual that really drew a lot of attention. I feel like Phoenix, it's a little bit more muted of, I don't believe so many companies are going there as they were in Texas. And also I don't think there's as big of a draw for those high net worth individuals.
Companies in downtown Phoenix. Today there's more than 400. I think the next 5 years in Phoenix are gonna absolutely dwarf the last 20.
Tech might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Phoenix and you picture it. The city is really better known for its golf courses, retirement appeal, and scorching heat. But its growth into a hub for technology has been playing out over several decades.
Following World War II, there was a mandate that was handed down by the federal government that said sensitive assets could no longer be located on a coast. And so our federal delegation went after a number of those technology companies.
One of those companies, Chicago-based Galvin Electronics, ultimately relocated to the city.
And that grew into what we know as Motorola, which became one of the largest employers in Arizona at 22,000 people.
And that was just the beginning.
In the 1950s, GE Computing was located in Syracuse, New York, and that group succeeded in bringing them back to Phoenix. In the early 1970s, there was this early stage company in Santa Clara, California that was working on semiconductors. So that same delegation went after that company and brought them back here. At that time, it was a little startup company called Intel.
And since then, we've had over 80 semiconductor companies.
The defense industry in particular has had a major presence.
Whether it's Raytheon or Northrop Grumman or Boeing, but in particular Honeywell.
Honeywell is one of the largest defense companies in the city with its aerospace division headquartered there.
Their human carry drone division, their military drone division, and their delivery drone division is being conceived of here in North Phoenix.
In the past decade, Phoenix has seen enormous change with several new companies transforming the tech scene.
If we look at cities that really do end up becoming these, important technology hubs, there are really four things that we usually see, and Phoenix really has all of them. So the first is a favorable business environment. The second really is that ecosystem of other companies. The next is really close proximity to a university that has a strong engineering program. And then finally, it is that availability of talent.
Phoenix has become a major semiconductor manufacturing hub. It all started with Intel.
Intel started here in the 1970s and then grew with its first fab at the Chandler Boulevard campus in the 1980s. And then in the early 1990s, they purchased their Ocotillo campus. So at all said and done, Intel's made about a $30 billion capital investment in the metropolitan Phoenix area. They currently employ about 12,000 people.
In 2020, Intel completed a new 1.3 million square foot fab at its Ocotillo campus in Chandler and has plans to invest another $20 billion, building 2 more fabs at the site.
Once you're in one location, it makes a lot of sense to add more scale to that location. Semiconductors has a very multifaceted, very big supply chain of equipment, chems and gases, all that need to go in those manufacturing.
Yeah. TSMC moving to America was really big news in the tech environment, mostly because TSMC, if you're not aware, is basically like one of the only companies in the world that makes really small chips. These are predominantly used by a number of things, but they're used in some of the key technology that we have for like phones and other gadgets. And so most other competitors like Intel can only go so small, but TSMC is known for having the smallest chips, period. And so there's been a lot of swirl around what's going to happen with Taiwan in general, and them being one of the primary manufacturers for a lot of goods. And so this has caused a lot of tension across countries for Taiwan. And so something that has been happening recently, I believe this was a policy by Biden, where he was working with Taiwan to help move a manufacturing site into America, and that is the one that is mentioned here. So that's pretty recent. So I believe that all generally happened over the last year or so, where obviously time before that they were planning and doing all that setup work, but really in the last year is when they really got set up. They started to do manufacturing, and I think they've had some of their initial chips somewhat recently in the last couple months. And so they're really just getting off the ground now. But this is really big news because this allows for potential of other areas of the world also manufacturing this chip, and that makes it less scary to have a single source of failure for something that's so key to so many businesses. And so this is going to be big there, and they have already plotted out a lot of land, as we have covered in the past, so they're prepared to make many manufacturing sites for TSMC right next to where they have it. And as they mentioned, once you do it once, it's going to be a lot easier. There's actually a lot of complaints of there being such a lack of knowledge and expertise in the area that they were not confident in their ability to get TSMC set up and actually start manufacturing to a high quality. But that was some of the exciting news in the recent months, which is they've actually proved that is incorrect. And so now that they've proven that we have the skill set, we have the ability, in that area and that market, that there's nothing stopping them from setting up more and more manufacturing plants in that area for these chips.
Once that's in one location, it makes it a lot more attractive for the next company to come.
But the semiconductor world has been abuzz with a new entrant into the area, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which makes the most advanced chips in the world.
TSMC is really a once-in-a-generation economic development project. This is a $65 billion factory that's building the most world-class chips that go into everything from strike fighters to computers.
We spent 21 and the better part of 22 building this facility. All of 23 we moved in the tools. And in 24, we began engineering pilot runs.
TSMC initially held discussions with the city of Phoenix back in 2016 when it was looking to expand more of its chip manufacturing beyond Taiwan. In order to secure the bid, the Greater Phoenix Economic Council spent 3 years conceptualizing a science and technology park that met the needs of TSMC and its partners.
In Taiwan, they're in the middle of science and tech parks. They really believe in having their suppliers and their vendors and their engineering companies and other like-minded companies where they can walk across the street, where they can go grab a cup of coffee.
The city was ultimately selected for TSMC's first advanced chip fabrication plant in the U.S. The site, set on a sprawling 1,000+ acres in northern Phoenix, includes a recently completed fab manufacturing 4-nanometer chips with 2 additional fabs under construction that will make more advanced 2-nanometer chips and beyond.
When their original look at Phoenix, it was a $12 billion capital investment and has now moved into a $65 billion capital investment.
I led the site selection team around the U.S., and one of the things that Phoenix did better than any other location, it has a 100-year plan for water. And one of the reasons that we selected Phoenix is it's got redundant power.
Our power companies have a 99.9% uptime. These semiconductor companies that can be, $50 million a minute if they have downtime for a loss of power.
In the Arizona desert, water is still a scarce commodity, and chip manufacturing takes a lot of it. The state recently restricted housing development in Phoenix, citing dwindling groundwater supply.
We are working on an industrial reclamation water center. When we get that in place, we will have near zero discharge to waste, which means basically the only water we'll lose is through evaporation.
Now Phoenix.
Yeah, this is a big thing that happens in the hotter states and areas of the US, I'm sure in other countries as well. But basically, water is key. We've just seen this with California, unfortunately. They recently ran out of water. And so there is challenges with having too little water and how you distribute that across civilians and the population and companies like agriculture or other businesses. And so in these warmer areas, they do a lot of effort to reuse their water and how they can be as efficient with it. And so that's exactly what that individual just mentioned, which is basically they're trying to figure out ways of recycling their water so that way they can keep using it and then they don't really have to get rid of any water that exists that they take into the system. Obviously, evaporation still exists, so it's never going to be 100% perfect. But essentially, the idea is recycle as much of the water as humanly possible. And this is something that in the hotter states, they're really good at because they've been forced into this optimization over time. And so that allows them to be a little bit more sustainable. And so some cities, such as Phoenix, are actually lower on the risk scale for running out of water or droughts than some cities who naturally have a lot more water, because while their water supply is dwindling, they haven't really increased their efficiency of usage. And so that is one of the ways that you can combat that issue.
Phoenix is close to breaking ground on the science and technology park it pitched to the company.
That tech park will break ground here in early 2025. At ultimate build out, we expect about 62,000 jobs surrounding TSMC and including TSMC.
They're basically duplicating the science park concept that was pioneered in Taiwan. And what that does is it solves lots of problems for our smaller suppliers because they don't have to buy land, they don't have to put the infrastructure in place. They can actually rent space and just plug in, and they can be here with us.
Arizona now is definitely going to be known as one of the places to get leading edge semiconductors in the United States.
There's 40 suppliers that have also come from all over Asia, all over Western Europe to invest here in Phoenix. That's creating thousands of jobs, multi-billion dollars of additional investment. This probably goes down as one of the best business cases of success stories in economic development in Arizona's history.
Phoenix was already a major hub for hot weather testing. Now it's become a hub for more advanced driverless cars. Over the years, Uber, Cruise, and Waymo have tested their autonomous vehicles in the city.
We're a sandbox for autonomous vehicle testing. It's also long-haul trucks, so 18-wheelers down the freeway. We've got companies that are testing between Phoenix and Tucson.
Just the infrastructure of Phoenix, like the gridded street environment, is quite good for testing. The weather is good for testing. It just made a pretty optimal place to test a lot of these autonomous vehicles.
Waymo, formerly Google's self-driving car project, is the biggest player. The company began testing its autonomous vehicles on the city's streets back in 2017.
We brought in our streets department and our police department, and I'll be honest with you, in the very beginning, they looked at Mayor Gallego and I like we had 6 heads. They're like, you want to do what? Where?
Waymo first launched its commercial robo-taxi service in Phoenix. It now operates across 315 square miles in the city.
We are the first airport in the world that you can be picked up or dropped off in a fully autonomous experience.
If we look now, just total number of robo-taxis.
That is actually a pretty cool statement to be able to say that they are the first ones in the world. I don't know off the top of my head, but that does make sense. There's not that many areas globally that you can actually drive autonomous vehicles on, and there's not that many that are basically out of their testing and development phase. So there's a chance that's true, but I would hold reservations. But if it is, that is pretty exciting to have that as a claim to fame.
Taxi miles driven. Phoenix is above and beyond other markets. People are doing it in a lot of markets now, but Phoenix is still the biggest area, the most miles driven.
One of the main reasons for its success, policy. Phoenix and Arizona have been welcoming to AV testing.
If you go back even to like 2015, when the technology was pretty nascent and still developing, then Governor Ducey did a lot of executive orders which really reduced barriers, allowing companies to test these vehicles on public streets.
Autonomous vehicle.
This is one of the advantages of sort of the US as a market, where because of the states and how they're able to enforce laws and change regulations, we have varying conditions for companies for a variety of purposes in every state to some extent. And that does make it annoying for companies to have to make sure they're abiding by the various laws as they move across the US. But this is something that enables innovation in certain areas. So Phoenix, as an area that clearly didn't have too much going on for them way back in the day, they were potentially a little softer on their regulations for autonomous vehicles to promote companies and businesses and employees and revenue to come to their area. And this then promoted that being the main area to be leveraged. The same thing with this chip manufacturing, which is if you're looking for businesses and things to come to your location, you're going to try being a little bit friendlier to them, have a little bit less regulation, and then it kind of feeds on itself. This is exactly why a lot of companies were looking to leave California, is because California has a lot more regulations. They also have a lot more taxes, and so that makes it a little bit less friendly to companies. But on the flip side, while they've mostly covered this as a positive aspect, this does mean that it potentially was more dangerous for Phoenix residents when these autonomous vehicles were being tested, because obviously if the regulations are lowered, then that means the company can do more there. One of the things that offset this, as they mentioned, is likely the weather, because obviously there's probably not going to be snow or anything like that they have to worry about. And while it does get hot, I don't think those levels of heat actually negatively impact a car or computers at that level. It would make it a little bit harder to cool, but it's likely not as bad as having like a lot of rain or a lot of snow or drastic changes in temperature that go really hot to really cold. And so this likely made it a little bit simpler for them to program and optimize on what should generally be relatively clean streets without too many obstacles, things like that, in the road itself. And so that maybe this allowed them to optimize their workflow. But again, there's pros and cons to that. So you can see it as a positive where it did help those businesses and likely this area. But also there's the opposite side, which is if you lower your regulations, you do allow risks to happen. And that's the trade-off that you make. More risk, more reward, less risk, less reward, generally speaking.
Testing in the city was nearly derailed following the 2018 self-driving Uber accident where a test vehicle.
Yeah, I didn't know this, but that was quite the segue. Yeah, this is exactly what happens, which is if you lower your regulations, this allows for mistakes to be made. This is where regulations are basically guardrails that you put in place to avoid issues. And so inherently, if one state has less regulations than another, then it's going to be potentially riskier for whatever that segment is. In this case, it's automotive vehicles. But in another case, it could be like gun ownership, as an example. Some states, it's really hard to acquire guns, and in some states, it's a little bit easier. And therefore, the states that it's a little bit easier in, that means more people will have them, and they're going to probably be used more. And so that could be good or bad, depending on the situation. And so same thing here, where you allow risk to increase, and this is where cars are obviously deadly objects. They are one of the leading causes of death in America, and so they're obviously very large, heavy objects that go really, really fast. And so if they take the wrong turn or they don't stop on time, obviously that can cause a lot of damage because humans do that today, and it causes a lot of damage.
Vehicle with a safety driver struck and killed a pedestrian. Following the incident, the company halted testing in the city and ultimately sold off its self-driving division, with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration condemning the lack of state and federal regulation for testing autonomous vehicles. In addition to autonomous vehicles, Phoenix is now seeing automation take to the skies.
So this drone drop-off is pretty cool. One of the things that I'm not sure if I'm following at the moment is how this would scale efficiently. So while it's really nice that if you could get drones to be completely autonomous, like this drone, for instance, let's say it could go from your warehouse and then drive or fly to whichever location you need to go and then drops off your package. Right now, it appears to be flying with just a single package, and it just drops that single package off. One of the advantages of classic transportation of goods is that, like a standard Amazon driver or somebody like your postman, they have a lot of packages and mail, and then they go to the general area that you're in, and they kind of just go like house after house after house, or as close to that as possible. If these drones only can hold a single package, then obviously they're going to need to make way more trips. And so they're going to have to offset this by a number of factors. Either they're going to have a huge fleet of drones to be able to handle single package drop-offs. On the flip side, this might allow them to theoretically enter a situation where they could drop off packages 24/7, especially if they were unmanned. And then that could offset some of that. Maybe they'll look into having more packages being stored in a drone, but that's where that would offset the efficiency of that drone. And these drones would likely only be able to carry so much without them getting to a certain size. And so that's going to be something that they're going to compete with. So I'm not sure if it's going to be cost effective for them. I'm not sure if they obviously have to manufacture these drones. Then they have to make sure that they are constantly functioning, repairing them. And again, just the offset of a human driving a car and carrying many packages with them for a certain local area. This would make sense. Maybe they could also offset this by having a lot of various locations as like drone hubs, but that would also take real estate. So I'm not entirely sure, and I haven't seen enough data on this to be convinced that this would be more cost effective for them. It is a really cool idea, generally speaking, and maybe there could be efficiencies eventually, but I'd be hard pressed to imagine that this is a sustainable path forward in the near future.
In November, Amazon received regulatory approval to launch its Prime Air drone program in Tolleson, a suburb in West Phoenix.
We don't see this as a test. This is just the first integration into an Amazon fulfillment center, and we'll start scaling way beyond here.
Will everybody be able to get a drone delivery at their house, or what's this going to look like?
That's the plan. So for us, scale is 500 million deliveries a year. We want to make this delivery method available to customers all around the world.
Drone delivery has been a long-time focus for the company, which first unveiled plans for that concept more than a decade ago.
Your family has decided you want to order Jenga. Added to my cart, delivery by drone. We place the order like you would at any other package.
Okay.
And you just
Okay,
place
delivered by 3/11,
Yep.
so 61 minutes. Delivery with drone, it says clearly you have to pay $9.99.
Yep.
Is there ever a time where this will be part of the Prime subscription? Okay.
We're working through it.
Mazda crafts cars for those who choose to do more. The CX-50 Hybrid lets you go farther.
So as that individual just mentioned, so they also highlighted the fact that it costs an extra like $9.99 for drone delivery. And so this is exactly kind of what I was mentioning, which is it doesn't seem sustainable to have that as a legitimate delivery mechanism because it has to be expensive. It has to be expensive to make the drone. It has to be expensive to operate it, to repair it, and to allow it to move. Because also, again, the heavier the package, the more energy it's going to take and potentially the slower it can move. And so it just doesn't seem sustainable at this point. But to their point, if they want this to be an eventuality, they will have to start somewhere. But I am curious how quickly they're going to be able to roll this out if they're currently charging $10 to already individuals who are subscribing to their service on an annual basis for deliveries. Especially when they're already competing with other folks like Temu, who are shipping to you actually slower, but you're having such cheap goods that people seem to be okay with that trade-off. So one of Amazon's key focus areas has been convenience for the customers, which is why we have things like next day or same day delivery, which have been huge advancements for supply chain and delivery systems. But again, this is where, what are you trading off for that benefit? You're potentially paying a premium because some of the goods you can get on Amazon at Temu. And so you're going to pay an upcharge for it to be sold on Amazon. And then if you pay a premium for it to get delivered again, then when you're already paying maybe 3, 4, 5 times as much as you could get that product elsewhere, at some point people are going to start asking themselves, like, why am I spending all this money for this convenience? Obviously, there's going to be high-end customers who really need something, like maybe Trump or Elon Musk. $10 to them means nothing. They would much rather probably get their item in the next hour. But for most individuals, you're probably going to be asking yourself, why am I paying 5, 10x the price to get something on Amazon to be shipped in an hour when I could just plan ahead and get something from a more affordable location in a week or something along those lines?
Suhang will pick the order down the bottom here. It'll say it's a drone order. Those boxes have a dampering mechanism inside that we call a trampoline. It actually is dampened when it falls from the drone. From the moment you clicked to the moment she's picked and packed, that's 15 minutes. We call it Prime Air Drone Delivery Centre. This facility, as is set up to do hundreds of deliveries a day.
I would also expect, we'll see what they do, but I would imagine that a human being probably has to drive this drone. I'm not sure if these are autonomous drones at this point in time. And also, like, would you trust a drone to drop a package? So curious to see if they cover how much of this process is autonomous, because that can also mean that they're maybe offsetting the cost a little bit, or maybe even not that much if they still have to pay for a different human being to still be there to help the drone fly and drop off its package, compared to somebody being in a van with packages.
So talk me through the design here. 6 propellers, it looks like.
There's 6 of them. We've designed the system in its entirety. If we lose a motor, we can fly on the other 5 and come home safely. The props were designed by us to reduce noise. 6 cameras, that's how we know what's happening around us and what's happening underneath us. This drone, as compared to our previous drone, is half the cost, flies twice the distance, and is half as loud. We have 2 takeoff pads and you have a couple landing pads.
That is actually really impressive stats, so kudos to that individual and the team working on that. It's great to see technology advance and how incredible it is, so that's awesome to hear. Less noisy, can go farther, more reliable. Those are all great milestones for technology and what they can bring to various aspects of day-to-day necessities.
Pads at the back here, those pads will continue to cycle 5, 6, 7 years out, we'll have this drone and we'll have other drones to do other missions. This is just the beginning.
The boom in tech activity in Phoenix has created tons of high-paying job opportunities.
We've moved from the average wage of a job in 2014 at $30,000. At the end of 2023, it was $84,000.
Demand for engineers has also...
Wow, that's pretty impressive, going from 30,000 to about 80,000. This definitely makes sense why people are starting to move to Arizona, and it's being a pretty serious hub. There's a lot of people who would love to make that type of money anywhere, so I'm sure that's definitely drawing some attention.
Been a major boon for local universities.
Arizona State University currently has 30,000 engineering students that are on campus today.
This year we'll produce 7,500 engineers or more, largest producer of engineers in the country. We have one of the largest incubators for new semiconductor companies in the world.
TSMC has been struggling to find skilled workers. The U.S., which once led in semiconductor manufacturing, lacks a talent pool of advanced chip engineers, forcing the company to create some of its own programs. Since the start of its Arizona fab, TSMC has sent some 600 engineers to train in Taiwan and brought over experts from its headquarters on temporary 3-year assignments.
Ultimately, we may need 20,000 in workforce for TSMC on the semiconductor technician and engineering side. We have created, in partnership with TSMC, the country's first registered apprenticeship training program in semiconductor technician.
And the city expects the impressive growth to continue.
We picked Arizona and Phoenix in particular because we've got over 1,100 acres here. The idea is we want room to be able to grow. And I won't speculate beyond what the 3 fabs that we're building are, but there's plenty of land for us to grow.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.